This is the Comics Alternative Interviews, a conversation with Keiler Roberts. Greetings and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative Interviews. I'm Derek, and today I want to share with you a conversation that I recently had with Keiler Roberts. Her new book, Chlorine Gardens, comes out this week from Koyama Press, and I talk with Keiler about her latest work, along with a discussion of some of her earlier comics. But before we get to that conversation, I want to let all of you know that this episode of the Comics Alternative Interviews is brought to you by those great folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There, you're going to find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off of the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that those discounts can be anywhere from 20 to 35% off the cover price. And every single month, you're going to find some unbelievable specials. Sometimes those specials could be as much as 45% off of the cover price. Sometimes 50% off cover. But occasionally, you can find discounts that are even more impressive than that. And head on over to DCB Service right now, and you can find unbelievable savings on a variety of comics for the month of September. And as we like to point out on the podcast, one of the best ways of getting your comics is in bundled form. DCB Service regularly offers bundles of comics from such publishers as DC, Marvel, and Valiant. For example, if you go to dcbservice.com right now, you'll find a Vertigo bundle, a Jinx World bundle, and 4 other DC bundles at incredible discounts. And this month, you can find all bundles at 50% off of the cover price. All of this just goes to show that you can't beat the prices at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to dcbservice.com right now for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do get your titles there, please be sure to send them an email and tell them that the two guys with PhDs sent you. In 2009, Keiler Roberts began putting out a series of self-published minicomics that she titled Powered Milk. These were brief stories and scenarios where she represented the experiences she's had as a mother, wife, and friend. Many of the situations were observational in nature. For example, some of her Powdered Milk comics were one-panel expressions of something offbeat and telling that her daughter Zia had said, but occasionally she would illustrate longer narratives that concerned her life as a mother. She's gathered these earlier mini-comics in collections such as Powdered Milk, Collected Stories, and Miseryland. Last year, however, Keiler began turning to book-length format and publishing her Powered Milkstories, what she continues to call her work, through Koyama Press. In fact, Sunburning was a text that we discussed last year in our publisher spotlight on Koyama Press's spring 2007 releases. And this week, we'll see the release of Keiler's next book, Chlorine Gardens. It's a work that's certainly in the Powered Milk spirit, but this book is notable in that Keiler engages more in long-form storytelling than she does in her previous comics. What's more, and as I discussed with her, Keiler brings a structure to the various stories and observations that's more apparent than in the past. In this interview you're about to hear, I talk with Keiler about the evolution of her comics writing, the role of journaling or diary illustration in her work, the process she undergoes in creating her stories, and the power, as well as the limitations, of exposing herself and her loved ones as subject matters for her narratives. I've had the pleasure of talking briefly with Keiler before during the 2006 Small Press Expo, an event at which she won an Ignatz Award for Best Outstanding Series. But this was a special occasion in that I got to talk with her in a longer, more sustained manner. This was an exciting conversation, and I'd like to share that with you now. I have the pleasure of talking with Keiler Roberts. Her new book, Chlorine Gardens, comes out on September 11th from Koyama. Keiler, welcome back to the Comics Alternative.
Thank you very much.
I say welcome back because I think it was 2 years ago at SPX I spoke with you briefly on the floor, and this was the day after you had won the Ignatz for Best Outstanding Series.
Yep, that was a very happy, chaotic time.
Did you find that winning the Ignatz increased the attention to you and your comics?
I think it did, but everything happens in like slow growth. It's like watching a chia pet or something. I don't think there's anything that's happened where there's been like an explosive change, directly afterwards yet.
Well, 2016 was a big year for you all around. Not only did you win the Ignatz Award, but one of your Powdered Milk strips was included in Houghton Mifflin Harcourt's Best American Comics volume for that year, right?
Yeah. I guess it was all the same year. Yeah, it was the same. My sense of time is so messed up and confused. But you did your research, so whatever you say goes.
Yeah. Well, did you find that also helped to bring attention to your comics?
Yes. And I mean, I guess the thing is like, I don't track everything and you couldn't, I mean, I don't even ask people like, oh, how did you hear about me? Which you could do. And I'm curious about it, but I often don't know how people are introduced to my work. So if you get a new Instagram follower or something, it's, I don't know why that person suddenly looked me up or if they've read my book or anything. And I mean, Annie Koyama is doing so much to promote my work and put it in people's hands and sending out copies, but she does so much work that's, it's so far beyond even what she lets me know. They work so hard and do so much. And I might find out about things like much later down the road or, it's just sort of unpredictable.
Yeah. Well, I found out about your work through the Ignatz. I remember it was that year that my co-host Gwen and I wanted to do a special episode of the Comics Alternative devoted to the Ignatz nominees for that year. And I had never heard of Powdered Milk before, but I remember, I think it was via email, getting in touch with you and asking you about it. And you were kind enough to send me digital copies of some issues of Powdered Milk, along with Miseryland, your collection, I think, of issues number 9 through 15?
Yeah, I just posted a comic about my crazy disorganized system and numbering. Yes, that's approximately right. I ended up doing like a separate volume 15 after including what I thought was volume 15, after I did Miseryland. But it just doesn't matter, the numbers. I mean, my books are all part of one big umbrella, series. They're all related to events in my life. But since I write out of chronological order anyway, like at any point I could write about a memory from college or childhood or any time. I just think of it all as like a rhizome. It's not a linear progression, and you could read my books out of order if you wanted to read more than one. You can sort of pick up anywhere.
Okay. So now you started the mini comic Powdered Milk back, when was it? What? It
was 2009.
Oh, 2009.
I was doing painting for like 10 years and teaching and stuff. And I had gotten, my degree in painting, and I honestly had no idea what was going on in the alternative comics world. I knew who Dan Clowes was, and that was all I knew. And my experience with comics was like, Sunday paper stuff, The Far Side and whatever from my childhood, but I had no idea. And then I was doing stuff with blogs with text and image, and I was really excited about combining like stories and personal stories and working, autobiographically. And so I thought I was like inventing something that already existed in comics, but was way better. So a much better medium. And so when I found out about it all, I was super excited, and I made my first volume, and it just says like everything has continued in sort of small steps since then.
So you no longer produce the mini comics Powdered Milk, but what you're doing now, in essence, is the same thing, let's say through Koyama, but in book form.
Right. Yeah. So I write a book, and it's, they've been about 120 pages a piece, and I will work on several stories, but I don't have the whole book written in the beginning. I will continue to write, my very rough stories like as I'm going along. And so I'll write a bunch of pages and then pencil them and then ink them and then write another 20 pages, all the way until the end. And then I have this like disastrous day where I have to figure out if there's an order that makes sense of these pages and see what the themes are, that I've been sort of somewhat conscious of, but not really organized about. And I lay them all out on the floor and step back and shuffle them all until it reads as, one book. And what I'm looking for at that time is like an emotional flow throughout the whole book. And there is, sequence does matter to me. Like the pages that you read first, set up something, but it's just not like a traditional storyline or a memoir even. It's, much more free flowing. So there is an order after all, but it's not really determined until late in the game. And so I didn't have to do that as much when I was doing mini comics because it was, maybe 20 pages at a time, like finished in a book. And sometimes some of those volumes had more relationship to others. I really like working with, a little over 100 pages because it gives me time to develop themes, and it's just the stuff that's been on my mind for, a series of months that sort of comes out.
Now, you just said that you consider the kind of comic that you do not really memoir. Would you call them maybe more diary comics, or maybe even better yet, comics journaling?
They're sort of, I feel like they relate to personal essay, like the people are doing.
Okay.
More than either of those, they're not memoir because they're not tied to like one life-changing event for me. They're not based on one challenge that I, as a protagonist, face and then, resolve or grow from or whatever. The beginning and the end are much more ambiguous. It's just, here's a slice of life. I don't think of them as diary either because I don't feel like I have to be reliably writing about what is going on at that moment in my life, Mm-hmm. I don't know, I sit down and I don't have any idea what I'm going to write about. And then something comes into my head, and then it often changes several times, and then it's like all sort of unpredictable to me. It's so that in that way it's sort of like diary because that diary is not organized in any like thematic sense. It's like just sort of whatever. But diary comics I think of as being you're writing to yourself in a diary. Mm-hmm. And I know that you're not in the sense that like a cartoonist or a diarist that makes it public, like is obviously aware of their audience. But I feel like there's still like that sense of you talking to yourself that comes through with diary. And like one of the artists that I really like who does diary comics really well is Kevin Budnick. And one of the things that he like puts, it's a very edgy, kind of risky thing to do, is a good diary comic will write about like what's going on in the moment while it's unresolved, while they're experiencing it. And he uses his comics as like a way to sort of process certain things. And he's not alone in that. But he just does an exceptional job. And the things I write about, I have to allow time between, like, the event, whatever it is, sort of has to be over, especially if it's a difficult event. Like, I need to have time to sort of see it differently and to know how it ended, and it's okay, and I can accept it simply because it's in the past. So I think that's why I would categorize myself as, like, not diary and not memoir. It's personal essay. And if I want to write about things that aren't always, like, about my identity and myself, and, like, memoir and diary comics also, like, tend to be very much about the writer,
Mm-hmm.
like, and I want to be able to think of myself more as, like, a pair of eyes, like, anything could become interesting, but I was a witness to this thing.
That's a good way of putting it, because a lot of your comics, and this was, I think, especially apparent in the early issues of Powdered Milk, are, I would call, more observational in nature. So you would get a page, or sometimes even just a single panel, of a particular observation or scenario. And more times than not, this was something that you noticed or observed that your husband Scott had done or said, or even more frequently, your daughter, how do you pronounce her name? Zia?
Zia, yeah.
Yeah. And in fact, there are a lot of your comics that are just maybe one panel with Zia saying something that is a little off base but funny, and it gives us a glimpse inside of how a young child observes the world, or maybe in your case, the family. And those aren't, I definitely wouldn't call them diary comics or memoir in any way, but they're more observations. And the way that you put it, the way that you see things and how other people react, I think, really puts the finger on, I think, what much of your comics are about, especially the older ones. But I have to say, Keiler, that one of the things I've noticed over your last two books, both of which published by Koyama, we had Sunburning that came out in spring of last year, and then in the next week, Chlorine Gardens is going to be coming out. I've noticed that you have engaged more in longer form storytelling. Was that a concerted effort on your part, or have you just found yourself evolving that way as an artist?
It probably has just sort of happened. I don't feel like I'm in control of what I'm doing sometimes. I mean, I am in control, but it's like you have intentions and then you do the work, and through the work, things arise, and then you're a decision maker, and an editor and all that stuff. And, I don't know what enables me to write a longer story sometimes and not be able to do it other times. I mean, my brain changes. I feel like I'm, several different people depending on what my mood is and my energy level and, like, how well my brain is functioning. It's so variable that I just have to, it's like, what am I working with today? And sometimes I can't write at all. I can, like, not even think in, sentences practically. But I might be, like, really in touch with images more, and, it might be better to paint for a while. Or I might have, something, like, very much language based to get out that, like, won't ever even make it into comics because it has no imagery associated with it. I don't know why things fluctuate so much, and I don't know what to, I can only respond to it.
Mm-hmm. And in fact, many of the comics in your various books, Chlorine Garden, Sunburning, and then the earlier Powdered Milk mini comics, concerned you as an artist, and you would write about your own experiences as a creator and some of the challenges they bring. And in particular, there's something that really struck me in your new book, Chlorine Gardens, where you're writing about, at times, feeling almost an abundance of material that you would like to work with to the point that it almost becomes crippling. And I'm quoting you here. You say, on some days, though, every object blooms with associate memories and feelings. It's all connected in a way I believe I understand but can't explain. I have too many ideas to start anywhere. There's no way to actually make anything of it. And this is, I don't know, I know we don't have pagination in this book, but it's around page, 45 or 46. Yeah. And one of the things that struck me about that is, you're writing openly about your own creative process, but in a way that seems almost not really defeating, but not overly positive. When you get to that last point, you said there's no way to actually make anything of it because there's just so much material there for you to work with. And I mean, it's one of the things I respect about your comics, your openness and honesty in terms of what's going on in your own life. And in this case, your life as an artist.
Yeah, those pages are totally about hypomania. And I didn't want to use that word because I feel like it's like overly specific. And I don't want people saying, like, getting into this kind of diagnosis or self-diagnosis for people like, oh, I feel that way, I must be bipolar. I think I am assuming that a lot of creative people have this happen, at times there's like so much is actually nothing. You're so excited, but you can't start anywhere. I mean, to me, it's like it feels like a very warm and positive feeling. It's very exciting and it's very happy in the beginning. But I could like spend all day in that state, just like enjoying the mood and actually, and then the anxiety starts growing more and more because I'm not actually doing anything. I'm not producing. And part of like hypomania and this like flood of, creativity and whatever, it's euphoria, but it's very, very close to irritability, and it turns into anger like very suddenly, which is something I didn't, it's not a pattern that I realized until it was pointed out to me, and then it became like super obvious. But I just wanted to write about these processes that I think like, maybe are more universal, and maybe I just have more of this experience, to when it becomes problematic, that's when it becomes like something you diagnose. Right. But I don't know. I think that like, that's what's so confusing about being an artist sometimes. It's like people talk about inspiration and motivation and, and people, when people start like pitching their ideas, and people do this on Facebook and they do it in classrooms and whatever. And it's like, I've spent a lot of time thinking about this idea. It's like, here's the characters and here's the storyline and here's the, where it's going. Do you think it sounds good? Do you think I should do it? And I always want to say like, no, I don't care how good the idea sounds. It's worthless. Ideas are completely worthless. And I don't mean that like 100%. I mean it like my ideas are worthless. Like it really, like that feeling of inspiration is like completely worthless to me personally because it doesn't lead to anything. The reality is like when I'm actually calm enough to get some work done, it's often boring and difficult and challenging, but I do get into a flow and I do get sort of lost in the process, but it's not characterized by this like super exciting, happy mood. Usually my mood is just sort of neutral when I'm being really productive. And I have a sense of where I want to go, and you just work step by step by step through it. And then ideas come to you like as you're working. But I just like, I'm so mistrustful of anybody's ideas who, especially if it's like a creative project, they have this outline and it's like such a great idea, but it's just like, it's just an outline, it's only worth it if you can actually execute it. And a lot of people think they can execute things and they'll say like, well, I could do that if I wanted to. But I don't want to, like people, when I was, here's a tangent for you, but he said, all right, it was okay. I was a realist painter, in grad school and stuff. And, people would be very dismissive about realist painting because they would say, well, if I took the time, I could do that too. It's just a skill. It's pure skill. It's nothing else, but my idea is something else is better than that. And I would say, like, bullshit. If you can't do it unless you do it, like, you think you could do something, like someone who's very athletic might think they could run a marathon, but they just don't because they don't prioritize it. Well, then they're not actually doing it, and they can't do it because they won't. And like, physically, maybe they could, but if you don't have the motivation or like the drive to get something done, you can't do it, So what I'm doing, back to this comic, is just sort of separating like the ideas, and the exciting part of being an artist is like kind of misleading. And you don't have to have like this big feeling of inspiration, and it's not like a big glorious thing, like the idea of passion. I would say I definitely have a passion for what I do, but I wouldn't characterize it as like heat of the moment fireworks passion. I think passion is like getting up and thinking every single day, I want to continue doing this project until it's done,
Mm-hmm. So would you call yourself maybe an anti-romantic creator?
Sure.
Because what you're saying here, it just sounds like you're injecting a dose of, we want to call it reality, into matters. And you're not, let's say, glorifying in some grandiose way this idea of the artist.
Right. Yeah, totally. I definitely consider myself a realist, and like in all things, and I don't think it's like pessimism, I think, like, I'm against idealization in like any format, like it bothers me to walk into a house when everything matches and is like controlled and just so, and there's like no sense of chance, because I want there to be a sense of chance, but I also don't like chaos, and I don't like disorganization. Like, I want something to be like exactly in the middle at all times. So, which is just, it's like a under the radar kind of perfectionism. Like, I want things to be messy to exactly the right amount. And I'm actually like hyper controlling, probably like worse than anybody who just like tries to go for perfection. Because I'm also like completely controlling about casual things. I don't know. It's just anxiety. That's another thing people don't talk about that much. Like, what is really like the driving perfectionism? That word should not have any positive associations tied to it. It is like completely fueled by being afraid of, things happening that are not in your control.
Mm. Are these things that you talk with your students about in terms of the anxiety, the non-idealization of inspiration and all that?
Yeah. I talk to them until they're sick of hearing my voice.
You mentioned earlier your bipolar condition, and I was thinking of that when you made this comment just a moment ago about liking things in the middle. Not only do you write about yourself as an artist and you kind of open yourself up to what you go through and at times even what you struggle with as a creator. But you also open yourself up when it comes to your health issues. And I'm curious, as I was reading through, and not only Chlorine Gardens, but we also get quite a bit of that in Sunburning. I remember there was one section in Sunburning where you describe you describe them as strange sensations. Mm-hmm. And you wondered why things smelled a certain way to you and not to others, how you perceived things visually different, and things seemed to be a little off base. And so you write about your health issues quite a bit. Do you find yourself okay and easy in terms of opening up, or is it a bit of a struggle to write about that?
It totally depends. This gets into like me I have to sort of be beyond something, like I can't be in a depressive episode and write about what's happening like to me at that moment. But I could certainly write about it if it's in the past and I know that I got out of it and everything's fine. So I'm completely comfortable talking about my health as long as it's not something that's, affecting me like right at the moment. Which is hard because bipolar doesn't really go away. And then, I was diagnosed with MS, which is Chlorine Gardens is, there's a long story about that, process. But I felt like, okay, well, the diagnosis happened it took a year of tests and speculation and all this stuff before it was like totally, determined. But it's, I've been writing since then, lots and lots of stuff. But I haven't written more about it because it's something that's too much like what I'm dealing with right now. And it's fine for me to talk about it, but I haven't been able to like get the distance from it to be able to write about it in any interesting kind of way.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you brought up the multiple sclerosis issue, because in Chlorine Gardens, we do get scenes where you're going in for diagnosis, you're talking with people about this possibility, and then it kind of drops for a while. And then when we get to the end of the book or close to it with the epilogue, in fact, you even title it Epilogue, and you describe to the reader that you were diagnosed about a year later with MS. That was a gut punch to me. It was a reminder of what I had been reading earlier in Chlorine Gardens. And then you kind of come out in this epilogue and say, yes, I was diagnosed with it. And again, that had me wondering, what are some of the issues that come up, as I asked you, when it comes to, let's say, exposing yourself in that way. But you feel that because maybe you haven't really gotten the effects yet, you can write about it a little more easily?
It's not because I haven't gotten the effects. What I wrote about was more like the diagnosis and the fact of it. I haven't written about like how it affects me like day to day now, and I've written stuff like on Facebook and stuff. I'm open and people know about it, and people know, I don't know. I'm in a weird, murky patch right now, honestly. I'm having a lot of fatigue, and I'm having, cognitive problems. And I tell people one by one, my friends, like things just aren't the same. My memory is really shot. It's really scary. I have a harder time like doing like very basic things, that I never thought I would have a hard time with. But everybody like is in this people want to minimize things, and I know that they're doing that with good intentions. Nobody's trying to be hurtful or anything, but people's comments like, well, everybody forgets things. Well, you just turned 40, I forgot everything. And, everybody does like absent-minded things or clumsy things or whatever. And I think they don't want to believe that it's actually different for me. But there's, I'm very aware of like, I've been a complainer my whole life. I hate being that way. I remember very clearly I was in like an art class in 6th grade or sometime in grade school, and there were a bunch of kids that I wasn't like friends with or not friends with, and I made some complaint about the project we were working on, because I always had a complaint in school. I always thought the teacher's not doing this quite right. There could be something, much better, a better use of our time, or like this rule doesn't make sense, or this question isn't fair, or whatever. And people hated to hear my complaints. And of course they did, because nobody likes to hear a complainer. But I have always felt really bad about that. I've always felt like, that's one of the things that's wrong with me, is that I see the negative part of things. And like writing comics, that can be the thing that makes something really funny, like I can use that to my advantage. It's not like a completely bad skill. And I think it's part of being like a very observational person, is to see what's going to go wrong with a plan before it's like put into place. And certainly like a lot of parents, can relate to that. Like you have to see like potential disasters, but I do it more than it needs to be done. Anyway, just to get back to like health stuff. I don't want to write a comic about health that's like a complaint of things, like, oh, this is just like really hard and really sucks. And I feel like I've avoided that with like all the bipolar stuff. I think I've always been able to write about it in a way that's not sugarcoating it and not like celebrating it or anything, but like is not so bad either. It's not just complaints. I try to find what's interesting about it. Like I wrote about in Sunburning, I think it was in Sunburning, like spending time in the outpatient hospital program, and there are a lot of parts of those 2 weeks of my life that I really care about remembering, that were useful to me. And I'm just in a stage with the MS where it's like I'm very much processing and experiencing and trying to like accept myself and like this whole new way of being, and adapt to it really. Cause like, I just can't do all the stuff I used to be able to do just because I don't have the energy. And I don't know how to write about that like in an interesting way. And I don't know how to write about it without just like complaining, like it sucks, it's just like I don't want this.
I don't get a sense of you kvetching in your comics. I mean, you do lay things out there and you do kind of tell it like it is. Mm-hmm. And, as I mentioned earlier, you're kind of exposing yourself and not only the good things, but also the potentially harmful things or less than joyous parts of your life. But I never thought that you were a complainer or, as I said, kvetching and using your comics in that way. And in fact, another part of your comics that we should point out that I think really stands out, and sometimes these are those observational moments that I mentioned earlier, the sheer humor and even silliness of the things that you see or the people who you encounter. Like there have been times that, especially in Sunburning, you represented your dad as being a little silly at times, which I really enjoyed. And I tell you, one of my favorite parts of this new book, Chlorine Gardens, is this Thanksgiving, you don't want to be my pants.
Thanks.
And for those who haven't seen Chlorine Gardens yet, this was a sign that you saw when you were out with your family, right?
Yeah. That bar, there was a gas explosion and the whole building is gone. And I feel terrible about it. I mean, I didn't know the owners or anything, but they always had these signs that were just really funny. But I think that one is like so much funnier than they meant it to be.
Yeah, and you really did see that sign. That was an actual sign.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, I can't make up stuff like that. It's too good.
Now, it's interesting that you said I couldn't make up things like that, because one of the questions that I definitely wanted to ask you is, you do base your comics, from Powdered Milk into these Koyama books on your own experiences, your own life, and the people in your life, specifically Scott and Zia, but also your parents and others. Have you thought about writing more pure fiction?
Yeah. I think about it all the time. It's probably never going to happen. There's and I don't care if it ever happens. It's not a goal. It's just like a curiosity. And I wonder what it is about me that makes me not do it. I love to read novels, but I love to read, autobiographies. I love, and personal essays and stuff and I love documentaries. I love reality. I mean, that part of being a realist is just it's a commitment to it. It's like, I just want to see what's actually happening with no filter, you know? And that's something, I mean, I stopped drinking at some point, like 5 years ago. And I think that was one of the biggest gifts of making that decision, is like, there's never an altered state for me that's, you know, I mean, I feel like my state is altered by, you know, just the strangeness of my brain all the time. I don't ever want to add on to that. I just want to be able to like be in this world, you know, and see it for what it is, because I do love things that are really happening. Like, I love truth. I love how strange people are and how unpredictable, you know, conversations are, and things that aren't planned. And I don't know.
Yeah, you write about your decision to stop drinking a little bit in this new book, but you don't go into too much detail about it. In other words, you give the reader just enough information to kind of assume or maybe even insinuate a couple of things. But again, you don't get into the weeds where you're potentially, say, complaining or whatnot, as you put it earlier.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think part of it is like wanting to avoid complaints, but I did try to write a comic about this. I have like 50 pages, you know, that were rough, that have been written about, you know, not drinking and about MS and stuff. But it's like, there are just things that just have words, and I don't have imagery. They just aren't, I cannot turn them into the comics form. I could express them in other ways, you know, and I made a long Facebook post like about not drinking and what it means to me. And it was just a list, and I was like, oh, I can write this as a list. I just can't write it as a comic. And that I accept that. That's, you know, there are certain ideas that just work for one format or another.
Mm. You know, I was asking you earlier about the way that you write about yourself as an artist. You know, one of the things that really struck me about your book, Sunburning, which came out last year, is the section where you discuss what your comics writing, the kind of style that you do, where you write about your own life and the life of your family, what that may or may not mean for your daughter, Zia. And in fact, at one point, there is kind of a fantasy where you imagine her older and, you know, looking a little different and older, and then coming to you as like, under the assumption that, let's say you decided not to write about her, and she asks you, Mom, why didn't you write about me?
Yeah.
And so what kind of responsibility do you see yourself as both an artist and a mother and wife in terms of writing about your family, and in certain ways kind of exposing them like you expose yourself in your comics?
Yeah, it's so much easier with Scott because I can just have him read a draft and okay it, you know, and he's not going to change his mind a year from now on whether he wants it out there in the world or not. But with Zia, like, she could say yes to all this stuff now and still, you know, have totally different feelings about it a year from now, or once a friend makes some comment or something. But I realized, like, kids are jerks and they're going to be mean to her and they're all going to be mean to each other. I mean, it's like the things they have to deal with, just being around a bunch of other kids that are immature all the time is super stressful. And they're constantly ganging up on one another, you know, and this is like from, you know, my friends who are parents, you know, all their stories combined about just like all the bad things that kids are doing to each other, and my own memories. And I wasn't like, you know, a target to the point where a lot of people are. I just feel like whatever I do, I mean, she's going to be messed up by some of her experiences, you know. She's going to be troubled and hurt and embarrassed. And I don't have that much control over which of those things it is anyway. I mean, the things that she wants that she can't have, we live like 2 blocks from Lake Michigan. You know, we have access to the beach. Like, I would never have believed any kid has access to the beach, you know, when I was a child. but we don't have a lawn. And she got very upset the other night because we don't have a lawn. And she said it was like the thing she wants most in this world. And she has, begged for other things too that she's not ever going to have, like siblings and stuff. And you just these are the things that are going to devastate her. This is the big lack in her childhood. And I don't know what my comics are going to do to her long run. It occurred to me when I was reading, an autobiography. It was Megan Steelstra. She was writing a lot about sex, and she has a son. And I was thinking, well, even she's writing about herself. She's not revealing anything personal about her son at all. But as a teenager or middle schooler or something, I would be much more at ease having myself be a cartoon character, that my mom created versus reading about my mom's sex life, So even if you don't write about somebody else, what you write about yourself could be devastating to your kid or not. They can just they just have to learn to live with it. And it is a gray area, and my daughter loves my comics. She is totally involved in them. She likes to see me draw. She's a participant. I mean, I also had the thought, obviously I'm not the only parent who is a cartoonist. What if I were really bad? There are parents who are really bad at being cartoonists. Here's my shock. I'm a snob. There's just a few of them out there. And I think now that's going to be embarrassing to their kids. Their parents are being public and they're not revealing anything embarrassing, but they're just not good. That could be embarrassing to a teenager or something once they realize and that's, I probably will realize when I'm, 10 years older that I'm no good and never have been. And then I'll be super embarrassed and I'll be eating my words. But there's just so many, life is so full of possibilities for shame and embarrassment and regret. And I can only do so much.
There's another scene, speaking of this topic, in Sunburning that really struck me. And this is where you're in the kitchen and you're dealing with eggs and you complain about the shells being so thin. And Zia comes in and wants to help you with the eggs. She ends up making a mess. And she's a little embarrassed about it. She says, don't tell anybody, don't tell daddy. But then she says, don't put this in a comic, okay? And then you have a panel of your reaction where it's almost as if you're looking at the reader to say, but this is in the comic, isn't it?
Yeah. Yep. That's what's going on. But then on the next page, it shows me asking her if maybe I could put it in the comic after all. I wanted to get to that point where, the reader obviously thinks that I'm going against her wishes, but I'm actually not, because I wouldn't do that. She did give me permission after a little bit of begging on my part. I didn't even have to buy her anything. But I definitely wouldn't even try to put something in if I thought it would embarrass her later. I have a sense of what's embarrassing to kids. She's embarrassed if she does something that's bad or wrong. And that's why she didn't want that in comics. She thought she had done something really bad by breaking the eggs without permission. But it wasn't really a big infraction. And once I, explained to her, several times, you're really not in trouble. Nothing bad is going to happen. It's done. It's over with. And, she was fine with it.
Yeah. Well, you do show her throughout your comics on the potty quite a bit. Do you think that she'll be embarrassed by this later on?
That did stop, though. It stopped when she was, 3 or something. I don't draw her naked anymore. I don't draw her butt, it's, there is she understands that it's like much more normal for a 2-year-old to have long conversations in the bathroom, and to be more exposed than somebody who's a little bit older. But I'm not done with bathroom scenes, and it's just I have to be the naked one, I can't do that to her anymore.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier, you were describing yourself as kind of a, I guess, comic snob in some ways. Now, you mentioned earlier that one person that you read was Kevin Budnick and his work. Are there any other cartoonists that you look at on a regular basis?
Yeah, of course there are. I've always loved John Porcelino's work. And he's somebody who, we were talking earlier about like knowing whether something should go with images or not. Like he's always included in King Cat, sometimes just a page of text, and the Hospital Suite, his book from a couple of years ago, which I absolutely love. The whole thing is a comic. And then at the end, he's got, sort of a long, text, few pages that describes things in a different way than how he did it in the comic. And I think he is amazing at striking a balance between those things and knowing when to write. Even like his blog, the way he writes that and the way he uses photographs, like he knows how to do things in so many different media. And I really, really love that. And he does like figure drawings that are totally different from his comics that are fantastic. I love Vanessa Davis. I think Lisa Hannawalt's books are extremely funny. Eleanor Davis, I'll read anything she does. Gabrielle Bell. There was a comic, Minty Lewis did this comic years ago, and she's no longer making comics, but it's PS Comics. It's like one of my favorites. Carabine has like my favorite mini comic of all time is the Gremlin movie Incident. And I met her like at the first ever Cake, the Chicago Alternative Comics Expo, and bought this comic. And it's one of the few pieces of work, including like film and all books and whatever, that has just like made me laugh until I'm bawling. It's so good.
Keiler, I want to go back to something that you had mentioned early on in our conversation when I was asking you about maybe how your style has changed from, let's say, the early 2000s or the earlier 2000s up to the Koyama books that we've had over the past couple of years. And you had mentioned that you are very much aware of the structure of the various stories. One of the things I noticed with this new book, and maybe I'm making too much of it, it seems to be much more consciously structured than your earlier comics. Definitely when you had the mini comics Powdered Milk, and those were only so long, there's not a lot that you can manipulate in each issue to structure in a certain way. But I noticed in Chlorine Gardens, even much more so than Sunburning, that there seemed to be a conscious effort to begin and end the text in certain ways. And what I mean by that is you start off in Chlorine Gardens by focusing on your memories of giving birth to Zia and all that went on there. So it begins with birth. And then, not the very end, but for all practical purposes, the end, or very close to the end, you end with a death of your grandfather. And is that something that you did set out to structure in a certain way, that you would start with birth and end with death in this new book?
That was one of those things that came about, when I was laying out all the pages at the end. Somewhere in the process of the book, I didn't write her birth story first. But it occurred to me as an idea that I had never written about it, and I was finally able to. And being able to talk about it is not always that, something was difficult and painful and now I've finally gotten over it so I can write about it now. A lot of times it's the birth was just it was like totally fine. There wasn't any trauma there or anything that I had to get over it. It was just that I didn't know how to make it. I didn't know how to contain it in a story, and then all of a sudden I did. So it's like waiting for that moment where it sort of like comes into this physical state, or like I know how to make it funny or something. So I was ready to write that story, and then my grandpa died at that time, and I wanted to write about that very soon after it happened, sort of immediately. And those memories were, obviously like very fresh in my mind, and very specific. And during the course of those days, when we were in hospice care and stuff, I was taking notes, just writing down what was happening to help me remember. But I don't know what makes, like I can't, that's something I can't control, like when I'm ready to write about something. And, and I didn't, there were a lot of things that sort of came together in Chlorine Gardens in terms of structure that sort of like I was able to arrange more at the end of the project.
Yeah. And in fact, that series of strips or comics toward the end of Chlorine Gardens, where you do write about the passing of your grandfather and what all you went through and what he and the family went through as well. It really hit home to me because right now I'm dealing with certain issues or similar issues with my father. We're not quite at, but almost at the point of hospice. And so it really resonated with me, that section.
I'm really sorry to hear that.
But you write about it in a way that it is kind of reassuring in a way. So it's almost as if, hey, there are other people who go through this as well. It's not just me right now.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure lots of people will find things familiar. I mean, that was one of the striking things, like when the hospice care workers would talk to us, it's just like, God, they do this every single day. This is just like, they just know these things and they have to tell every single person what to expect. And, there's part of a routine here almost. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But you think of it as, obviously it's a one and only event for each one of us.
So now Chlorine Gardens is going to be coming out this week, but I guess the official debut is at Small Press Expo next weekend, correct?
Yes.
Now, are you going to be there?
Yes.
Oh, good. I look forward to seeing you there. I'm heading up that way on Friday as well. Right. And in fact, had you said, no, I'm not going to be there, it wouldn't have surprised me because one of the things I gather from your comics, not only Chlorine Gardens, but also in Sunburning, is you point out how you're not the most, how do I put this, joyous of travelers.
No, I hate traveling. But I do love SPX. I love being there. I love that it's all in like one place, and I get to see so many people there that I never get to see, throughout the year. And I am looking forward to actually being there very much.
And you do have a table there.
I do. Scott and I do. And then, Chlorine Gardens will be at the Koyama table. So I'm signing books, for an hour each day, and I'm on a panel about bipolar on Saturday, and then I'll be at my own table. People can bring over the books to get them signed anytime other than the official signing times.
Yeah, well, I look forward to seeing you again in person next weekend.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. So now Chlorine Gardens just about to come out. What else are you working on right now that you can reveal?
That I can reveal. Well, I did a zine of paintings. It's wordless. It's just, I've been working on these small paintings over the last year a little bit. And so I have it's just a zine of the reproduced paintings. And a lot of them are like images that were in my books, like were comics panels, but they're full color acrylic paintings, and they have a different impact as an image once they're made that way. Scott, my husband, Scott Roberts, did an anthology. It's called Loving Richards Valley, and it's a tribute to Michael DeForge's Instagram webcomic, which was Leaving Richards Valley, which is amazing. It's like got over 500 pages. So Scott got, all these people to contribute, 1 to 3 pages, and it's all risograph, using, a couple colors, different colors per creator. It's like this really beautiful collection. And so he'll have that there. He's been working on getting more copies of that. And then all the proceed, all the money for that project, every dollar that is spent on that book, gets donated to a organization that Michael DeForge picked, which is addiction. I don't know exactly. It's Toronto-based addiction group. I can't remember the name of it. That's really bad. But anyway, it's going to a really important cause. So I'm in it. I did a couple pages, and I'm just excited for Scott to get more books out.
That's good. So, I mean, how is it that your companion, your husband, is also a comics creator?
How is it?
Yeah, I mean, how does it work with the two of you? I mean, is there any competition? Is there any tension at any point? I know that in your comics there have been a couple of occasions where you're working and he comes in and you hint ever so slightly, let's say, that you don't want to be bothered.
It's nice. It's nice. I think like our sensibilities are so different. Like he's very much. His favorite people are different people. He's into like very dynamic, complex visuals that often, might be overwhelming to me. But I appreciate them. But I can't, it's like, I can't even think about the complexity. And he's he has like more abstract tendencies, and because there's like a difference, like if he were an autobiographical storyteller like me, like then I could understand that there would be maybe some, I don't know, like competition or something. But no, we're definitely like, we're on the same team. We work together. We are, I think, very good at like being supportive listeners to each other, and having fun together through comics. And like, it's wonderful to have something in common, and to like care about and talk about the same people and show each other things. And, it's like it's very unique, our situation, because not only are we both cartoonists and we can share all that, but like he has an incredible job, that he is extremely good at and very dedicated to, and is paid well for. So it benefits me directly, because I don't have to teach very much. And I've been able to have a lot of studio time to get my books done and have like that freedom. So I don't know. It's definitely something that, I don't know, I lucked out big time.
Well, speaking of the work that you do, I know last year we had Sunburning. We're about to have Chlorine Gardens come out. And I hope that in another year and a half, we have another book collection of your comics.
Thank you.
Yeah. Keiler, I want to thank you again for coming on the Comics Alternative and taking the time to talk about this new book, which comes out this coming week, Chlorine Gardens.
Thank you. I want to say, I have to say hi to Amy, who's been a character a lot of times. She's a very good friend, and she always listens to my podcast. And just in case she's the only one, I hope you liked it, Amy.
Great. Yeah. Get her listening to this and subscribe to the Comics Alternative.
Thank you.
Once again, I want to thank Keiler Roberts for taking the time to talk with me for the podcast. Her latest book, Chlorine Gardens, comes out this week, and it will officially debut at SPX this coming weekend. If you plan on attending the Bethesda convention, then be sure to check out Keiler's table as well as that of Koyama Press. Get your copy of Chlorine Gardens. And if you want to find great prices on a variety of other comics, then head on over to the website of our sponsor, Discount Comic Book Service. As I mentioned at the top of the show, if you go to dcbservice.com right now, you'll find unbeatable prices on a variety of single issues as well as many bundles. That's dcbservice.com. And after you do get your titles there, get in touch with me and let me know what you thought about my conversation with Keiler Roberts. If you go to our website, comicsalternative.com, you'll find that you can leave us a voice message online via SpeakPipe. Or you can contact us the old-fashioned way. Pick up that phone and dial 4153-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427. You can also email us. We're 2guys@comicsalternative.com, or you can contact me directly at derek@comicsalternative.com. And you can find us all over social media. We have accounts on Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, Google+, Goodreads, Pinterest, YouTube, Slack, and Discord. You can subscribe to the podcast through Apple Podcasts. You can stream us on Stitcher. You can also find us on Spotify, on TuneIn, on iHeartRadio, and Google Podcasts. But you can find every single one of our podcast episodes, as well as the reviews and comics-related commentary that we post on our blog, simply by going to our website, comicsalternative.com. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Keiler Roberts, and we have more interviews lined up in the days to come, so be sure to check back for those. Until then, take care.